We live in an age of psychological drought, but the true catastrophe is not the drought itself. It is that we have lived inside it for so long that we have forgotten what water feels like. We have adjusted our senses to the absence of vitality. We have learned to call this dryness normal. And in doing so, we have mistaken the desert for reality itself. There is a quiet depletion in the modern soul that no amount of stimulation can touch. A kind of erosion that does not announce itself with pain or crisis, but instead operates with a terrifying subtlety, draining color from experience, depth from perception, meaning from action, until life itself begins to feel like a sequence of mechanical gestures, performed by something that is no longer fully present. You feel it in the mornings when nothing truly calls you forward, when the future does not pull you but must be pushed toward. You feel it in the evenings when distraction replaces fulfillment, when noise becomes a substitute for meaning, when exhaustion is not the result of effort but the result of emptiness itself. And you feel it most disturbingly in the strange mechanical rhythm of your own existence, as if something essential has quietly withdrawn from within you and left behind only the structure, only the function, only the shell. And this condition, though unnamed in modern language, has always been known in the deeper traditions. It is called Ariditas, the dryness, and Ariditas is not sadness. It is not simply chemical imbalance. It is not even despair in its dramatic form. It is something far more insidious, far more silent. It is the experience of being cut off from the living current within you, the realization that something that once moved, once responded, once reached outward and inward at the same time, has become still. You continue to exist, but you no longer grow. You continue to act, but you no longer feel the meaning behind your actions. You continue to breathe, but the breath no longer penetrates the deeper layers of your being. And so the world flattens, color drains into neutrality. Time stretches into something heavy and indistinct. Desire weakens not because it has been fulfilled, but because it has been starved. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to live as if life were something happening outside of you rather than something unfolding through you. This is the beginning of the desert, and in the language of Carl Jung, this would not be understood as mere depression, but as something far more fundamental, a loss of the soul, not the soul as a religious abstraction, but the soul as a living function, a mediating layer between the visible and the invisible, between experience and meaning, between what happens and what it signifies. And when this mediating function collapses, you are left with surfaces, with events that no longer penetrate, with experiences that do not transform, and surfaces, no matter how numerous, no matter how intense, can never nourish what has been lost. And so you turn outward as one inevitably does, toward stimulation, toward distraction, toward accumulation, hoping that quantity might compensate for the absence of depth. But the paradox is merciless. The more you attempt to escape the dryness through addition, the deeper the dryness becomes, because Ariditas is not a lack of content, it is a lack of connection, and what is required is not more, but a return. There was a time when this state was not misunderstood, when mystics, alchemists, and those who walked the interior path recognized dryness not as a failure, but as a phase, a necessary stripping away, a removal of illusion, a confrontation with the ground of being without ornament or distraction. But what was once entered consciously is now encountered unconsciously. What was once guided is now endured blindly. And so you are told to fix what you are experiencing, to optimize it, to medicate it, to eliminate it as quickly as possible. But no one tells you the deeper truth, that the desert is not the problem. The desert is the signal. The desert is what remains when the false sources of vitality have been exhausted, and hidden within this apparent emptiness is something that has not died. Something that has not disappeared, but something that has withdrawn, waiting for a different kind of response. This is what the ancients called Viriditas, the green power, the living force, the invisible vitality that animates all things, the same force that pushes a seed through stone, that bends a plant toward light, that insists on growth even in the most hostile conditions. And this force is not external to you. It is not symbolic in a poetic sense. It is literal. It is the fundamental movement of becoming within your own being, the energy that allows transformation to occur, that gives meaning to suffering, that creates direction out of chaos. And when this force is present, life is not something you must force yourself to engage with. It is something that pulls you, something that unfolds you, something that moves you forward from within. But when it withdraws, you do not simply feel low, you feel absent, as if you are no longer participating in your own existence. The alchemists recognized this force and named it the secret fire, not because it was rare, but because it was hidden beneath habits, beneath fear, beneath the rigid structures of identity that accumulate over time, but most importantly, hidden beneath inertia. Because inertia is the true guardian of dryness. It is the force that keeps everything as it is, that resists movement, that prefers the familiar even when the familiar is lifeless. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You are not only experiencing Ariditas, you are also, in subtle ways, cooperating with it. Each time you choose what is easy over what is alive, each time you repeat what is known instead of responding to what is meaningful, each time you avoid the friction that growth requires, you reinforce the system of stagnation. And slowly, without realizing it, your life stabilizes, not in vitality, but in emptiness. Which is why the return of Viriditas cannot be passive. It cannot come from comfort. It cannot be delivered externally. It must be activated. And this activation always feels like resistance at first. Resistance against inertia, against habit, against the quiet gravity that pulls you toward non-being. And the alchemists understood this and called it opus contra naturam. The work against nature, not against nature as the world, but against nature as unconscious repetition, as automatic existence, as the patterns that have taken control of you without your awareness. This work does not begin with transformation. It begins with small acts that feel disproportionate to their size, movements that seem insignificant but carry immense symbolic weight. Getting up when everything in you resists, speaking when silence has become a refuge, creating when consumption feels easier, moving when stillness has turned into paralysis. And these actions are not powerful because of what they accomplish externally, but because of what they signal internally. They send a message into the depths of the psyche that something is still alive, that something is still willing to move. And at first, the response is almost nothing, a flicker, a brief warmth. A moment of curiosity that appears and disappears, but if sustained, if repeated, if honored, that flicker becomes a flame, and that flame is the return of Viriditas. But action alone is not sufficient, because alongside movement, perception must also change. Modern consciousness has become literal. It sees objects but not meaning, events but not patterns, facts but not symbols, and in doing so it strips reality of its depth. And this is what Jung described as the loss of the symbolic attitude, the inability to perceive the world as meaningful, interconnected, alive with correspondence. And without this attitude, even the return of vitality can go unnoticed. But when the symbolic attitude is restored, something shifts, not in the external world, but in how the world is experienced. Difficulty becomes initiation, repetition becomes message, coincidence becomes communication, and gradually something extraordinary occurs. Viriditas does not only return within you, it begins to reveal itself around you, in patterns, in symbols, in moments of unexpected clarity. As if reality itself were responding to your re-engagement, because the soul does not exist in isolation. It exists in relationship, between inner and outer, between what you are and what is calling you forward. And Ariditas is the collapse of this relationship, while Viriditas is its restoration. And here is the final paradox. The green force does not return by escaping the desert. It returns by moving through the desert differently, by refusing to collapse into it, by acting, perceiving, and responding in ways that contradict its pull. And this is the real alchemy, not the transformation of substances, but the transformation of experience, the ability to extract life from within lifelessness, movement from stagnation, meaning from emptiness, and slowly, almost imperceptibly. The desert begins to change, not because the world has shifted, but because something within you has begun to move again. A pulse, a direction, a subtle but undeniable sense that life is no longer something you endure, but something unfolding through you, and this is Viriditas. Not an idea, not a metaphor, but a living force. And once it begins to return, it does not ask for permission. It expands, it grows. It reorganizes your perception, your actions, your very sense of being. Until the dryness that once felt like an ending reveals itself as the ground from which something entirely new emerges, not despite the desert, but because of it. And yet even here, at the point where something begins to stir again, where a faint pulse returns beneath the surface of your experience, there remains a danger that is rarely spoken of. A danger not of failure but of misinterpretation. Because the mind, conditioned as it is to seek clarity, to seek resolution, to seek something definitive it can grasp and conclude, will attempt to name this return prematurely, will attempt to stabilize it into a concept, to convert it into identity, to say, this is who I am now. And in doing so, it risks repeating the very pattern that led into the desert in the first place. For the desert was not only the absence of vitality, it was the consequence of fixing what should have remained fluid, of identifying with what should have been observed, of holding onto what was meant to move. And so the return of Viriditas demands a different posture, not possession, but participation, not certainty, but attention. Because this green force does not belong to you in the way the ego wishes to claim ownership. It moves through you, it animates you, it reorganizes you, but it cannot be contained without diminishing its own nature. And this is why the traditions speak of it in paradoxical language, as something both within and beyond, both intimate and autonomous, both yours and not yours, because it arises from a deeper layer of the psyche, from what Jung would call the self, the organizing center that exceeds the ego's capacity to comprehend or control. And when Viriditas begins to return, it is not merely that you feel better, it is that the structure of your experience begins to shift in ways that are subtle but irreversible. Time itself is no longer a flat progression, but a field of unfolding significance. Moments begin to carry weight again, not because they are dramatic, but because they are connected, linked into a larger pattern that you begin to sense rather than define. And this sensing introduces a new kind of responsibility, because once you perceive that life is not random, that your experiences are not isolated, that there is a correspondence between inner state and outer event, you can no longer remain entirely passive. You are implicated in your own unfolding. You become, in a very real sense, accountable to the process that is moving through you. And this accountability is not imposed from outside. It emerges from within as a kind of quiet insistence, a pressure that does not force but invites, that does not demand but calls. And you may notice it as a subtle discomfort when you move against it, a sense of dissonance when your actions no longer align with the direction that is opening. And this dissonance is not a punishment, it is guidance. It is the psyche signaling that the flow has been interrupted, that the movement of becoming has encountered resistance. And here again you are presented with a choice, not once, but repeatedly in small moments that accumulate over time, to follow what is emerging or to retreat into what is familiar. And the difficulty is that what is emerging rarely feels secure. It does not come with guarantees. It does not present itself as a fully formed path. It appears instead as fragments, as intuitions, as impulses that point but do not explain. And to follow these requires a tolerance for uncertainty that the ego finds deeply uncomfortable, because the ego seeks stability through definition, through closure, through knowing, while the process of transformation operates through openness, through ambiguity, through a willingness to remain in motion without immediate resolution. And so the work deepens. It becomes less about escaping dryness and more about sustaining movement, less about achieving a state and more about maintaining a relationship with the living current that has begun to return. And this relationship is not static. It evolves. It requires attention. It requires adjustment. It requires a kind of listening that is both inward and outward at the same time, because the signals of Viriditas are not always obvious. They do not always arrive as clarity. They often appear as subtle shifts in interest, as moments of unexpected resonance, as a quiet sense that something matters without being able to articulate why. And if you ignore these signals, if you override them with habit or dismiss them as insignificant, the movement begins to weaken, not because it disappears entirely, but because it is no longer being met, no longer being reciprocated. And the relationship, like any relationship, depends on participation from both sides. And this is perhaps the most demanding aspect of the process, that you are required not only to receive but to respond, not only to notice but to act, not only to feel but to follow. And following here does not mean surrendering to impulse blindly. It means engaging with what emerges consciously, testing it, refining it, allowing it to shape your actions in ways that are both grounded and alive. And over time, as this engagement continues, something begins to stabilize, not as rigidity, but as coherence, a sense that your inner state and outer actions are no longer in constant conflict, that there is a continuity between what you feel and what you do, between what you perceive and how you respond, and this continuity generates a form of strength that is different from control. It is not the strength of forcing outcomes or maintaining appearances. It is the strength of alignment, of being organized around something that is not constructed but discovered, something that does not depend on external validation because it is experienced directly. And this strength does not eliminate difficulty. It does not remove the presence of challenge or uncertainty, but it changes your relationship to them, because difficulty is no longer interpreted as a sign that something is wrong. It is understood as part of the unfolding, as a necessary tension that contributes to growth, and uncertainty is no longer experienced as a threat to be eliminated, but as a space in which new possibilities can emerge. And in this way, the very conditions that once reinforced Ariditas begin to serve Viriditas. The same moments that once drained you now become opportunities for engagement. The same patterns that once trapped you now become material for transformation. And the desert itself, which once appeared as a barren expanse without meaning, reveals its hidden function. It was never empty, it was preparatory. It stripped away what was unnecessary so that what is essential could become visible. It removed the illusions that masked the absence of connection, so that connection could be rebuilt on a different foundation. And this realization does not romanticize the desert. It does not deny the difficulty of the dryness or the reality of the suffering that accompanies it, but it recontextualizes it. It places it within a larger process that extends beyond the immediate experience. And in doing so, it restores a sense of direction, a sense that even in the absence of clarity, there is movement. Even in the presence of emptiness, there is potential. And as this understanding deepens, the fear that once accompanied the dryness begins to diminish, not because the dryness disappears entirely, but because it is no longer interpreted as final. It is seen as transitional, as part of a cycle that includes both contraction and expansion, both withdrawal and return. And this cyclical awareness introduces a different kind of patience, not the passive waiting that characterizes stagnation, but an active patience, a willingness to remain engaged even when results are not immediately visible, a trust that the process is unfolding even when it cannot be fully perceived. And this trust is not blind. It is built through repeated experience, through the recognition that each time you respond to the movement of Viriditas, even in small ways, something shifts, something opens, something reorganizes, and over time these shifts accumulate, they compound. They begin to alter the trajectory of your life in ways that are both subtle and profound, until eventually you find yourself inhabiting a different relationship to existence, one in which you are no longer primarily reacting to circumstances, but participating in a process that is both personal and transpersonal, both individual and universal. And at this point, the question of meaning, which once felt distant or abstract, begins to resolve itself not through intellectual answers but through lived experience. Meaning is no longer something you search for. It is something that emerges from the alignment between your inner state and your outer actions, from the coherence between what you are and what you do. And this coherence, sustained over time, becomes the ground of a different kind of life, one that is not defined by the absence of difficulty or the presence of constant satisfaction, but by the continuity of movement, by the ongoing interplay between dissolution and creation, between descent and ascent, between the desert and the green. And it is here, in this continuity, that the deeper significance of Viriditas reveals itself, not as a temporary return of vitality, but as a principle, a law, a fundamental aspect of existence that operates regardless of circumstance, that persists beneath fluctuation, that remains available even when obscured. And to live in alignment with this principle is not to escape the conditions of life, but to engage with them differently, to recognize that within every moment, even the most barren, there exists the possibility of movement, of growth, of transformation, and that this possibility, once recognized and acted upon, becomes the axis around which everything else begins to reorganize, until the dryness that once defined your experience becomes only one phase within a larger cycle, and the desert, which once felt like an ending, becomes understood as a passage, not despite what it took from you, but because of what it revealed and what it made possible. If something in this has stirred within you, if you recognize the dryness not as your identity but as a phase, a signal, a threshold, then understand this clearly. You are not meant to remain in the desert, but you are also not meant to escape it blindly. You are meant to learn how to move within it, how to ignite the hidden fire beneath it, how to restore the green force that has always been yours. And if you want to go deeper into this path, into the hidden architecture of transformation, the ancient mechanisms of the psyche, the knowledge that was never meant to be surface level, then stay connected to this space, because this is where we uncover what most will never even suspect exists. And if this resonated with you, don't just watch. Engage, reflect, return, because this is not content to consume. It is a process to enter, and the moment you begin to take it seriously, it begins to take you seriously in return.